parents at their campus.
The university announcing free counseling for those who feel threatened by Ben Shapiro's visit. The LA Times publishing an article many are comparing to hurricane preparations.
And the question is, have you satisfied your deductible, or do you have to pay out the money should you need the counseling? Ben Shapiro joins us now. He's the editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, syndicated columnist and host of the Ben Shapiro Show. Ben, what is it about what you say that forces children to run for counseling?
Well, I mean, first of all, look at me. I'm just pure physical intimidation.
You're scary.
And that's why I'm doing this,
very scary.
It just shows.
Obviously.
It just shows, Ben, how much they need you there. I mean, these kids are going to counseling. It's like, grow up, get some thick skin. You need to be there speaking and teach them a thing or two.
Well, I mean, as I've said before, if you feel like you need counseling for my speech, you probably need psychiatric help in some way. So I guess that's appropriate. What I talk about in these speeches is I talk about the fact that violence in political settings is not appropriate, which you would think would be basic civics 101. And I also talk about the idea that in America, you're living in the freest country in the history of the world, and there aren't people out there trying to stop you. And so you should stop talking about how society is setting up institutional obstacles, and you should stop worrying so much about so-called white privilege. You should instead focus on what you can do as an individual to better your life. And if you see instances of racism and instances of sexism or homophobia or bigotry, all of us stand with you if you can name the instance. But you can't actually just sit there and blame America for all of your problems.
Sure. And we understand you're going to be talking a little bit about that radical leftist group, Antifa. But ultimately, don't you think it's not that they don't want to hear about Antifa, they just don't want to hear from a conservative guy?
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the things that's been really shocking, and I think it's one of the reasons why you're seeing even some folks on the left who are disconcerted by this, is that Antifa and the hard left are calling me a white supremacist, right? I mean, I'm an Orthodox Jew who is literally the #1 target of the so-called alt-right white supremacists in 2016, according to the Anti-Defamation League. They're saying that, you know, I was some sort of part of the Trump fascist regime. First of all, Trump is not a fascist, but beyond that, you know, the notion that I am a part of the Trump administration is absurd. I actually didn't vote for Trump or Hillary in the last election cycle, but it just shows you how far the left is off base when they decide that everybody who is to the right of Bernie Sanders must be a fascistic threat to the United States wearing Nazi uniforms.
And of course, Jill Stein was happy to get your support, Ben, so that's what you're saying. Hey, Ben,
God forbid.
Why do you even want to speak to this group? If they feel this way about you, why go?
Well, I'm not speaking to the group that's actually protesting me, but you know, I spoke at Berkeley last year, and there was no problem whatsoever. One of the reasons that it's imperative that conservatives go to Berkeley is to demonstrate that this is not going to be a fascist town run by people like Antifa. I mean, it's a free country. Berkeley's still part of the United States, and the First Amendment still applies. By the way, there's incredible demand for conservative speakers there. We were given a 2,000-seat theater before they sliced off the top half of the theater and said that nobody could come because they were afraid Antifa was going to come, literally rip bolted chairs off the floor and hurl them down into the audience. So they took 1,000 seats away from us. But we sold out a 1,000-seat theater in 40 minutes. I mean, we easily could have filled a 4,000 or 5,000-seat theater there. So there's clearly a demand for dissenting views in what is a pretty monolithic area.
One person tweeted out that you're a Category 5 hurricane. Someone else says, the LA Times said their headline was Berkeley bracing for the right-wing talk show host Ben Shapiro's visit. And then this was in the campus newspaper, the Berkeley newspaper. It said, we are deeply concerned about the impact some speakers may have on individuals' sense of safety and belonging. No one should be made to feel threatened or harassed. Support services are being offered and encouraged. You mentioned all the violence. I want to get your reaction about that. And if you are expecting violence, why do you want to put yourself in the middle of that?
So, as I say, I think that Berkeley's expecting violence. The city council last night approved a resolution finally allowing police to use pepper spray against violent protesters, which shows you where Berkeley is, that they weren't allowing the police to do that before. But they've set up a cordon, apparently a hard cordon, around the auditorium where I'm speaking. They shut down 6 buildings, including the student union. They say there's going to be a very visible police presence.
Holy cow.
It's all insanity.
Yeah. And Ben, what is your message for parents who are considering sending their children, their young adults, to 4-year college where you only get one political point of view for 4 years? What sort of person comes out at the other end of that?
Well, if you're not a conservative at 18, then you will be a leftist by the time you're 21 if you move into that machine. I've always said that it's a good testing ground for conservative ideas. I think the people who are really disadvantaged by the leftism of universities are people in the middle and people on the left, because they never hear a dissenting point of view. But if you're on the right, like I was, I mean, I went to UCLA and I was right-wing, and I went to Harvard Law and I was right-wing. I always thought that it was a neat thing, actually. I got to test out my ideas and test them against the best the left had to offer. The problem is that if you're on the left, you never hear anybody with a differing point of view, and so you come up with this notion that's been imbibed wholesale by the Democratic Party that everybody on the right, because you've never heard a right-wing argument, everybody on the right must be a Nazi and Nazis are worth punching.
Right. Unbelievable. Ben Shapiro, the human hurricane, the tornado that is, the natural disaster that may be. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a lot.